It is a video that has been watched nearly 250,000 times on YouTube. Content creator and urban planning commentator Uytae Lee took a very close look at the Vancouver special for CBC News, how the special came to be and why that home design wound up getting banned. In the end, he came up with what he thought was a big lesson learned from that iconic house.
I think there's an important lesson here. Maybe we don't need to be so concerned about the look of new housing because, frankly, looks are just a small part of why we value things. The Vancouver special didn't care about being the most beautiful house. It just cared about being the most useful and affordable house for the people building them. And instead of the world ending, we grew to love these houses for reasons I'm not sure we'll fully understand. But what I do know for sure is that right now, many cities do need more housing, and they need it fast. So I can't help but wonder, maybe it's time for a new special.
And Uytae Lee joins us now. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure to be here.
You have made a lot of videos about all sorts of things, transit, housing, etc. The Vancouver special one seemed to hit a nerve, and perhaps not surprising in this region. What surprised you about the reaction to it?
Oh, I will say it was it did surprise me as well that it kind of struck a nerve with a lot, or not struck a nerve, but that it resonated with a lot of people. I'll admit, it was one of the tougher things that I had to pitch to CBC. They were like, oh, this is a little niche, it's about one house, who's gonna watch it? But I mean, I was very pleasantly surprised and validated, that people, I think really what it comes down to is that a lot of people, I mean, literally thousands of people have grown up in Vancouver specials and really had a curiosity and sort of a sentimental attachment to this sort of house. But I also think kind of embedded in that story is like a kind of an interesting piece of hope for a potential solution out of this housing crisis that we're in. The fact that we were able to build so many of these houses so quickly because it wasn't just a cheap design, but it was a very repeatable design that, kind of got the rubber stamp from City Hall within, I think it was like 3 weeks or something like that. So I think for a lot a lot of reasons, it was a fun video to make.
And speaking of sort of repeatable design, we know the federal government reviving the Second World War housing plan said it would revive standardized housing blueprints for builders.
Right.
What do you think of this move?
You know, I was really excited to see the announcement come out, especially, shortly after the video. I don't want to take too much credit for it, but, I think the promise in it for sure is that like the only real way to build a lot of housing very quickly is to do a little bit of copy and pasting. And I want to be careful with there's certainly trade-offs you get with designs and certainly, not every site is the same, especially in sort of these urban centers, but to some extent we have to do some amount of standardization just to increase the efficiency at which we're building housing right now. I think that's kind of the key part of it. I will say ultimately I'm cautiously optimistic because, the federal government, they referenced, I think it was like wartime housing. It was like a specific initiative that came out of the World War II to build a lot of veterans housing. And there are a couple things that are different today than the way that we're doing it back then, which is first, it was government owned and built.
That's
and
right.
Today we're kind of expecting the private sector to build it. So I think there'll be some, it'll be interesting to see how that gets applied.
And I have to ask you quickly, when it comes to the provincial government, you're on the board of BC Housing. One of the big plans they've talked about, one of the big emphasis, has been building around transit hubs.
Right.
Quickly, what are the challenges and what are the benefits of that you find?
Yes, the benefits I think are pretty evident in that if we are to put a bunch of housing anywhere in our region, it's really in these areas that are well serviced by transit because there are sort of growing pains that you can avoid when you build near transit. A lot of new housing, especially when you put it on the outskirts of a city and places that aren't well served by transit, you need to build a ton of parking. Often these places don't have a lot of amenities nearby. And so, when we're talking, building lots of density near, let's say, SkyTrain stations, it's a pretty sensible place to put it. But the challenge, of course, I think it is that the location in which we've built transit is also where we have a lot of renters and people who are vulnerable to displacement when new development comes in. And so I do think in some areas we have to be extra careful about those sorts of concerns. I think there are some areas that absolutely need a ton of new development. There are specific ones like Nanaimo Station or 22nd Avenue Station, where it's literally just houses next to a SkyTrain station.
Uytae Lee, we appreciate your time and expertise. That's all we've got for now, but thanks so much for coming in.
Fair enough. It's a real pleasure.